Miko Poesis. Oh, we got it. Okay. Understood. Tansi Miko Poesis, Nitsi Kasun. My name is Joni Oldhoff, and some folks know me as Miko. I'm the programs coordinator for Moms Against Racism Canada. And I belong to Mitchell Kalahu Nation, Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. I'm so grateful to be here today and for all of you joining us. Thank you all for taking the time to be here for this conversation. Yeah, really excited. We have a special guest today, Iris Chen from Untigering. So thank you so much for being with us, Iris. Before we begin, I'm just going to take a moment to sort of ground myself in this conversation and in the place that I'm in. So I invite you to do that as well. I have my smudge going, so I'm just going to take a few deep breaths. It's actually been a minute for me. I've hosted so many talks online and in person, but I have been away from work. Or, well, I just started in this new position and I've been away from hosting things for a few months. And so it's feeling anew again for me. So I'm just taking a moment here. To kind of ground myself. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to honor and recognize the territories in which we sit. So Mara is located on the stolen traditional lands of the Lekwungen, the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wisinek nations. I extend my deepest gratitude to the keepers of this land, to its hereditary chiefs, its matriarchs, its knowledge carriers, and land and water defenders. As a transplanted urban Indigenous person, I recognize my responsibility to these lands and its people, and to walk gently, to center the voices of this place, and to respect the traditional governance according to the Lekwungen and their relatives. So Nihiwa Kokomaganak, which means all my relations, all of my relatives. All right, we're here, we're doing it. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Carrie to introduce herself as well before we begin with the questions.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be here with you all and to be here with Iris. I was chatting with Iris before we got onto the space and recording just how I've been following her for a while and I just love all of the wisdom that she has. So I feel really grateful to be able to be part of this talk. And I come to this space as a mom. I have three littles that are ages 10, 8, and 6. And for me, myself, I am biracial, so have Swedish, Irish, English ancestry on my mom's side and African ancestry on my dad's side. And am in my 40s, and it's like this exploration of who I am and finding out all of these things. So recognizing also that I am neurodivergent and that my kids are neurospicy. And so all of these things, it's a wonderful time of connecting with who I am and that like connection to myself, and with that too my connection to space. So I'm a guest on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, and so as Joni was mentioning, the Songhees Esquimalt nations. And for me, what that means to be a guest here in this space and how I can do that in a good way. And so I'm doing the best that I can. There's always room for improvement, but to really uphold the voices of the nations here and to support the Indigenous sovereignty. And so that's a little bit about me. For those who might be new to MAR, because I always forget because I'm steeped in it, I am the founder of Moms Against Racism Canada, and we started back in 2020 just as I was telling Iris, a happy little accident. Essentially, we were just wanting a space where as moms we could get together and talk about like how do we do this anti-racism thing and how do we raise anti-racist children. And much to my surprised delight, there was many people who were wanting to have that conversation, and so we built this space, this community, and right now we have 2,300 members across Canada. We have about just shy of 40 volunteers who do a lot, so much work in the background to bring all of the things that we do. And we have our MAR talks. So these wonderful spaces, we have our MAR shift series, which is more kind of learning and unlearning specifically. And then each month we also have community opportunities for chats and discussions. So we have anti-racism at home at the beginning of the month, and then at the end of the month we have behind the smile candid conversations with BIPOC moms, where as BIPOC moms we get to come together and hold space for each other and just be seen, be known, be supported, and really start to create that village. Um, yeah, and then we also have some really great things. We've been starting doing some things with some for kids too, because that's the kids are our world, right? And so we have our Be a Kid program, which Joni is leading and doing wonderful things with. So we take BIPOC kids just in our local area for now and do a different activity each month so that they can build their own community and have that safety in that affinity space, because sometimes uh whether it's for financial reasons or knowledge reasons or parents feeling uncomfortable, uh some BIPOC kids don't get to go and experience certain activities. And so we are trying to build community in that space. And then one of our best programs that I absolutely love is our diverse book basket programs. So we have a couple of different advocacy teams. One of them is our education advocacy team, and they've curated 10 racially and culturally diverse books and bundled them by grade. And then we send them out to classrooms, to teachers, to school libraries, to families all across Canada. So it's a great way to kind of um, quickly diversify a bookshelf, and then we provide supporting resources with that as to how do you use these books to have conversations with the kiddos in your lives about anti-racism values and how to stand up to anti-racism that way. So that's a lot about me and Mar kind of went on, but Iris, you asked, so I had to
I did.
answer.
And that's amazing. Very cool.
So I will flip it back to you, Joni, because I think that you are going to lead us through this wonderful discussion today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carrie. It's awesome. I love hearing about all the stuff going on at MAR. Yeah, it's an honor to be working here. So yeah, hi again, Iris. Thank you so
Hi.
much for taking the time to be with us today. Can you share a little bit about yourself so we can all get to know you better?
Sure. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Iris, and I'm the founder of the Untigering movement and also a parent coach. So my heart is really to help parents practice anti-oppression in our families. I think that's one way that I describe what I do. So I am a mother of two teenagers. I have two boys who are 14 and 16. And I am a Chinese American, but I actually spent most of my childhood in Edmonton, Alberta. So I
Oh,
have a lot of love for Canada. Um, I- yeah, so I spent most of my childhood in Canada. In my teenage years, I was in Northern California and went to college in the Bay Area, got married, and actually moved out to China and lived there with my husband. We started our family there. We raised our boys there. We were there for 16 years and just recently returned to Turtle Island in 2019 and are living in the Los Angeles area on Tongva territory. So that's just a little bit of background about me.
nice. That's awesome. So you're familiar with up here then. And also
Yes,
that's
yes.
the territory that my people come from as well, as Edmonton, like Alberta specifically. So you've been on my land, and actually, I've never been back there. I've lived in BC my whole life. I've been transplanted, so I've been born here. One day, though, one day. So we would love to hear about how Untigering came to be, and what does it mean to be a deconstructing tiger mom?
Sure. So yeah, like Carrie mentioned, it actually really surprised me how untigering has turned into a movement, because I started it in 2017 really as a blog, as a personal blog, where I was documenting my own personal journey of shifting away from authoritarian tiger parenting and really learning how to be a peaceful parent when it felt so unnatural to me. At least it felt that way. In reality, I feel like it's really going back to our most natural selves. But yeah, there was so much of my conditioning that made it hard for me to do these things that I wanted to do, and that were very countercultural to my subculture. So for those of you who don't know what tiger parenting is, the term comes from Amy Chua's book, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. And she really describes her upbringing and the way that she was raising her children as a Chinese American mother. And I think it really captured an extreme example, like a very harsh, extreme example of the type of parenting that many people like me grew up with, like as second generation immigrants, as those of East Asian origin. A lot of that was very normalized in our culture, of having really high expectations, high demands, the the desire to raise children that are super successful and accomplished in whatever they do. Um, yeah, like maybe some verbal abuse or other types of abuse going on, but we never thought of it like that because it was just so normalized. Um, and so for me, that was, you know, I grew up in that culture. I grew up with that type of parenting. And then even as I knew that I was going to shift with my children, I wasn't going to be that harsh, but I still ended up expecting obedience, really using power, my power over children, over my children, expecting them to be excellent and, successful in whatever they did. And yeah, it just came to a breaking point for me, where for me, I ended up just becoming a very compliant, good little girl. And for my children, especially my oldest, he was pushing back. He was saying, I'm not having any of this. I'm not following your rules. I'm going to express myself the way that feels right for me. And I didn't know what to do with it. I thought that I just needed to come down harder on him. I needed more discipline, use more of my power over him. And it was really devolving. And yeah, I hit a breaking point, and then came to learn more about conscious parenting, peaceful parenting, whatever you want to call it. And so Untigering came about because I personally was going through this tectonic shift of the foundations of my worldview and how I saw myself, how I saw children, how I was like what I believed about parenting and what my role was. And all of that was like shifting. And I really wanted to share that and process that out loud with people who, who don't are not automatically drawn to peaceful parenting because they don't see anybody around them doing it, or they're just conditioned in ways where like authoritarianism and control and behavior management feels like the right thing to do. And so yeah, that's how it started. I began to just write my stories and really wrestle with these different ideas that I believe were true, but were so hard to practice because of, the patterns that I was caught in. And it just took off from there. I think people really resonated with that. And yeah, and wanted to join me join me in this journey. And so I'm so grateful. And so I think like the whole deconstructing tiger mom thing is, I'm really approaching this work as somebody who is like not the expert, who's not like, this is the way to do it, obviously. And like, for those of us who are really struggling, who come from different backgrounds, who come from other ways of parenting, and it's not easy. It's not easy to make those shifts. And so I have a lot of compassion for those of us in the journey. And so, yeah, as somebody who's deconstructing, like taking the time to unpack the ways that this type of authoritarian parenting has not only harmed our children, but harmed us, because likely we were treated that way as well. And so doing a lot of healing work and reparenting of ourselves as well, and learning new ways to be in loving, respectful relationship with ourselves and our children.
I love that. And it is so hard, you know, and as I was hearing you, I'm just like reflecting on my own life. And I many many moons ago I used to actually run the gentle parenting group here in Victoria. And part of my own journey was, you know, trying to find that kind of community and trying to find other folks who I could kind of do this work with. And even though, you know, I don't want to say I've had all this training or take all of these workshops and things like that. My kids, I didn't say this at the beginning, my kids are 9 and 3. And like Carrie, I'm autistic and I have ADHD, and my children are also neurodiverse. And I am really like, I struggle with it still to this day. And it doesn't matter how much work I've done around it, I'm still almost daily like, oh, you know, I've made a mistake, and I'm doing the repair work all the time. And um, yeah, so I really like relate to that feeling of like, oh, it's a continuation, right? And so why do you think parents would want to embrace untigering? Like why do you think folks come into this space?
I mean, I know for me, it was like an act of desperation. It was like I was hitting rock bottom and I didn't know what else to do. Um, but I think just like if we look at the fruit of tiger parenting and compare it to the fruit of untigering, I feel like there's just like no comparison. I think if we're really honest about what we want to um, grow and nurture and create with our children, like honestly, peaceful parenting is, if we're going to it the practical way, is the best way to do it. And like, okay, let's just unpack tiger parenting or authoritarian behavior management type of parenting, where you're just focused on outward behavior. It really fosters power struggles and conflict because you're trying to use your power as an adult over your child to get them to do what you want them to do. It creates shame in your children because they can never live up to your impossible expectations. You're always telling them what they're doing wrong or how to be better. It creates resentment and deception because they're trying to hide from us when they feel like they're failing. There's just a lack of open communication and authenticity. So for those of us who grew up with that type of parenting, we may have learned how to behave and how to like be the good kid, how to obey, how to get the good grades. But what was our relationship with our parents like? Were we able to really be our full selves with them and tell the truth about who we are, what we feel, or what we believe with them? And so, yeah, like on the surface, things might look good, but underneath the surface, there's a real disconnection and a lack of closeness and ways that we felt like perhaps we had to hide parts of ourselves. And I feel like that's definitely not what we want to do with our children. So with untigering, I believe that it really focuses on needs rather than behavior. So rather than just like the surface, like looking underneath, really trying to meet the needs of our children. It's like based in respect and the sharing of power, empathy, unconditional love and acceptance, trust, open communication. So for me, it just feels better. I don't know. Sometimes like with authoritarian parenting, we feel like we're doing the right thing. And like, this is what we're told we should do, but it just doesn't feel good. It just creates so much conflict with our children. And I've found, you know, I've been practicing like untigering and peaceful parenting for about 7 years now. And like to me, I'm living the benefits of it out. Like, of course, there's a lot of work that you put into it, and it's a process and it's the years. But like now my children are teenagers, and I can honestly say that we have like, I'm so grateful we have such a beautiful relationship. And like the stereotypes that we have of teenagers, I don't experience that at all. You know, teenagers being rebellious and like angry and I mean, they're hormonal and it's fine. They can have big emotions, right? But it's just like the sneaking, the lying, the rebellion, the pushing of boundaries. Like for me, I don't experience that because I'm not using my control over them. I'm not trying to control them. I'm not using power over them.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think like for me, I'm living out the fruit and the beautiful benefits of this type of parenting, and I'm so grateful for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really love that because it kind of gives me hope. You know, like as somebody who's trying, really actively trying to be a peaceful parent, I think to myself, you know, and there's so much of the unlearning that's happening. Me and my partner were just having this conversation the other day, and he's like, well, if we don't punish our kids, you know, how are they going to know? You know, how are we going to keep them in line when they're older, when they're teenagers? Like, and you know, it's that unlearning of like, well, that's not how we want to garner respect from our kids, right? Like, this is not how we want to have this connection. I don't want my kids to be afraid of us. Like, why would we want to do that? When we really start like kind of breaking down like the way that we've been parented, and through that authoritarian, we're like, oh yeah, you know, like this really, it makes sense to try something else. Like I know for myself, I had a really hard like youth and teenagehood, based on my own trauma. And yeah, I know I definitely did fear my parents through that year. And I truly do get so worried. Like that's one of my anxieties. I'm like, I am scared of teenagehood because of my own experiences and because I don't know what to expect. But I do hope that through like utilizing peaceful parenting now, that it does pay off in the future, right? Like we hope for that.
When it's
So
if Joni,
our, or yeah, go ahead,
can I
Carrie.
just jump in for a second? And like the whole peaceful parenting, and I can really relate with the out of desperation kind of trying to find a solution. And, you know, I'm so grateful for my spirited, you know, strong-willed kiddos who just said no and kind of really forced me, let's say, essentially into finding a different way. And how much healing has come from that, and like unpacking all of this together with my partner too, and that process, and recognizing that like with that feeling of that resistance and that like how will they know, and like these things that come up, like that's our little me that was in that situation before, and that's what we were taught. And so it's our little me trying to protect our kids in that moment from the experiences that we had too. And so like it's been a beautiful process, as you say, like the fruits of it, not just for our kids and our relationships with our kids, but our relationships with ourselves.
Mm.
And, you know, healing some of that experiences from our childhood, and just how we were, you know, socialized and conditioned within that.
I love that, Carrie. And actually, my therapist said to me yesterday, she was like, you know, when you respond in this way to your children, I want you to take note of how it feels in your body, because there is a healing that's happening for you when you're meeting their needs in that way. See what happens. And I was like, wow, you know, when she pointed that out to me, like, yeah, I have a visceral reaction when I respond the way that I know I needed someone to respond to me when I was young. And I get that chance now with my kids and my spirited kids too. And that's really powerful for sure. For sure. Um, so, our cultural identity, cultural standards, and how we've been socialized play a role in the way that we parent, especially our expectations of our children. We'd love to hear about what prompted you to start questioning your parenting expectations. Like, was there a moment, like you sort of touched on this a little bit, but was there like oh, aha, I need to make this change? Or was it like a slow unraveling for you over time?
it was definitely a process, but there were aha moments for sure. And I do want to say, yeah, like I grew up with tiger parenting. I was living in China at the time. I also grew up very conservative Christian. And so there were a lot of different layers that reinforced authoritarianism. And so there were many years where I didn't question it, where it definitely didn't feel right in my body. But I think that's the thing about authoritarianism. It's actually something that you need to reinforce over and over again and have to be like indoctrinated with because it just doesn't feel right. But but that was what I was living with. And it was really hard for me to question those beliefs because that challenged a whole worldview again of, hierarchy of who was the real authority in my own life and all of that. And I think part of my own journey was also deconstructing that authoritarian religion in my life so that I could begin to really experience relationship that wasn't rooted in power, that was actually rooted in love and acceptance. And so one aha moment for me was actually going to a parenting workshop. And I think up until that point, I had read a lot of parenting books because I was trying to figure it out. And I was trying to like ace the test and do things right. But all the books that I was reading were very authoritarian books. And so I was trying to, implement those, do those things. And I went to this parenting workshop and she was actually talking about brain science. She was talking about science and biology. And I had never approached parenting that way. But she showed brain scans of babies, different brain scans, and the brain scan of like a healthy, well-attached child, and then the brain scan of a neglected or abused child, and how the sort of the amygdala or the limbic system of the abused and neglected child was like enlarged and sort of oversensitive. So what that meant was that their fight, flight, freeze reactions were overstimulated. And so they would quickly and easily go to those places because they felt constant threat. And so they would, react in tantrums or angry outbursts and all of those things. And I think that like, because one thing that I struggled with my oldest child was like extreme tantrums and meltdowns, all of that. And I had always interpreted that as he was being willfully disobedient. He was misbehaving. He was like choosing to be naughty, however I framed it. And I think that was the first time I realized like, oh, like he cannot calm down. He is so dysregulated. And instead of helping him, instead of co-regulating with him and creating more calm in his brain and his body, I was like punishing him. I was creating more threat. Um, so that was like a huge wake up call for me where I know I like just saw differently. I saw his behavior differently suddenly, where this whole time I had been interpreting it as something like a quote unquote sinful behavior, something he was choosing to do to rebel and, come against me. But once I realized this is like, oh no, that is not it at all. And he really needed help. He really needed my help. And this whole time I had been punishing him and withdrawing from him and all of those things. So it just really grieved me once I woke up to that. And up until that point, I had been using all sorts of like different disciplinary strategies to, control his behavior. And yeah, I went home that night and I just told my partner, like, I had been still spanking up until that point, maybe. And I said, we have to stop, or at least for me, I'm going to stop this. I have to stop this. And yeah, just waking up to how harmful that was a huge wake up call for me.
Sorry, I'm keeping my my things off. There's a literal parade going past my window right now. So I have it muted. I'm
Fine.
also realizing I'm in like the worst lighting here. I have to be, my children are home because it's weekend, so I am in my room and it's just not the best place for lighting. So
That's
apologies
fine.
for that if I'm like shifting around all the time. Yeah.
But
Do you want to
on
read?
I was gonna
Sorry,
say,
Carrie, you go
Iris,
ahead.
like
Go for it.
I can connect with that. Like I remember for me, like I think there was like some big moments and some smaller moments. And along that line, like I remember seeing it reframed of like your kids are not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And that was like the same kind of thing, that shift of like, oh my gosh. But that's how we are socialized. Like I'm curious too of what you think. Like I read so many parenting books and did so many workshops, and the I think the knowledge of the time and for like our parents and a little bit into our generation was more of the spare the rod, spoil the child, and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And so it, even just with my first kiddo who's now 10, knowing in my heart the things that were right, but then having all of the external voices coming, whether it's like the parenting experts or like the grandparents or, friends who have read these things and all that kind of stuff. So curious for you, and I think this might connect into one of the questions. So I'm sorry, Joni, maybe you can pair it together, but just that what that experience has been like for you, because you said like you started untigering as a way to kind of process, and it seems very vulnerable to put yourself out there in a way that's very different from what was happening at the time. And so what that experience has been like for you to kind of reconcile those things.
Yeah, so to how to reconcile like the process of shifting versus like what I had been socialized to believe, is that?
Yeah, yeah, and just that external pressure coming to say, no, stay this like status quo, like don't, this what you're doing now is radical, or you're spoiling your kids or babying them, and those kinds of things.
Sure. Well, I think for me, I felt like I gave that way a good go. And, like I had done years and years of that type of parenting. Um, and again, like practically, it just wasn't working. It
Mhm.
was just causing so much more. And so it's like no amount of convincing or like trying to like tell me that that's the right way can convince me when I'm seeing the results of it in myself, the way I felt about it, and also in my children. But I tried for years. I tried for years and I kept on going. So, um, so it really was a point where it's like, it doesn't make sense anymore because I did it that way. I did it that way. I was like, hardcore. I had the behavior charts. I had, all of it. And it just created more conflict. It created more disconnection. And so I think that's sort of like the benefit of me writing about it as not somebody who started right off the bat as like a gentle, conscious parent, as somebody who actually put all these other authoritarian things into practice. It's like I did it and it caused havoc in my family. And so yeah, so like I feel like no amount of trying to like pressure me or convince me could make me go back to that, or could make me say like, yeah, this is the right way, because I tried it and it was just horrible. So but I do think like, how to respond to all the pressure. I mean, I think I tried to really tune into what was happening with me and my family, instead of um, getting a lot of outside opinion. I think especially when we're making big shifts in our life that are countercultural to our family patterns, to our social group patterns, sometimes we need to withdraw. Sometimes we need to like really become more rooted in our own knowing, instead of getting a lot of outside opinion. And of course, we do need support. And so it's like, how do we find, like, okay, if I'm moving in this direction, how do I find my community that is moving in that same direction? And I don't have to, um, yeah, like, so community is important, but like moving in the direction of where you want to go, and maybe creating a little bit of distance from the voices and from the communities that don't support that shift. Sometimes that's what we have to do. Like if you are trying to overcome alcoholism or whatever, maybe you can't be part of the party scene anymore for a while, right? So it's the same thing. It's like when we're trying to create new patterns, um, yeah, maybe needing to remove yourself from those environments for a while, really finding other community that can support you in your group, in your growth, all of that.
Because I was like, who else is doing this? Like, I needed somebody else to be like, you're not crazy, basically, right? Like, I couldn't actually fully see the comment, but one of my kind of moments was when my son came home. I couldn't get him to sleep. He had really awful colic, so I was told like, oh, just let him cry, just like let him figure it out on his own. He'll be fine. You're teaching his strength, and actually, like that. Voice like he's strengthening his lungs like from the parents, and like that was really coincided for me, because for me it's been a lot of back towards what I would consider traditional parenting roles. And I mean, I guess maybe in some language we would say like untraditional, because it's not part of this society, not part of this culture, right? But for me that's been really important, is how does my identity coincide with the rules and values that my ancestors carried forward in order to inform how I'm doing things now. And that started to help, for me anyways, to kind of let go a lot of from that outside pressure of like, well, I don't really want to engage with colonial society anyways, you know what I mean? Like I am already deconstructing this part, and so it manifests itself in that way as well. Speaking of identity, I know for myself as an Indigenous mom, as I was saying, I often need to reevaluate the way that I'm informing my parenting, and actively challenge my lived and intergenerational experiences, in order to parent through peaceful parenting values, which for me is really, it can be hard because there's a lot of trauma there, right? There's so much trauma. There's so much disconnect from family already. And there's so much, particularly, right, from multiple generations. Like I'm the first of my family to not be sent away from like to school, so or to be like disconnected, or to go through the foster care system or something like that. So I'm really starting with like I have no blueprint really, beyond from my ancestors. So I'm interested to hear from you how your Chinese identity aligns with your overarching philosophy of peaceful parenting and anti-oppression. I know earlier you had also mentioned that you feel like it's kind of more of a going back too, and so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I've really learned a lot from Resmaa Menakem. I don't know if people have heard of him. He wrote My Grandmother's Hands. And just, there's this quote that I always go back to. He says, trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. Trauma decontextualized in a people looks like culture. And so when I think about Chinese culture, like how much of it is actually trauma, you know? And so I think part of it is really unpacking, like, what does it mean for me to be Chinese? What does it mean for me to have Chinese values? What part of those values is actually trauma responses? And what part of it is like really something that we want to hold on to and bring forward in our cultural practices? And so I think a lot of the things that we associate with Chinese culture are actually horrible trauma responses, like tiger parenting being one of them, which is very much stereotypically Chinese parenting. And when I think about that, it's just rooted in so much trauma. It's fear-based, scarcity-based, where we're like needing to compete for survival. It's the belief that your worth is just based on your achievements and your performance. And I think it's just important for me to recognize like these things that we consider culture are not necessarily inherent to our Chinese identity. And just because I'm peacefully parenting doesn't mean I'm not being Chinese or whatever. These are often caused by like really historical, intergenerational trauma that has happened over time, whether it's been famine or war or disease or things like that that have happened in our culture that have caused us to react in certain ways. And so I personally feel less of a tension with that now than maybe I did in the beginning, where I was really trying to break some of those patterns. But now, as I'm like seeing my Chinese identity and Chinese culture more through this lens of like being trauma informed, I feel less of a tension and more of an integration and more of a sifting through, which all of us have to do. Just because we're like, you know, more connected to, or like more indigenous or whatever, it doesn't mean that there are not parts of that culture that need to be sifted through. And I think for all of us, we are responsible to shape culture. I think we sometimes think of culture as something that is static, as something that is set in stone. It's like, okay, this is what it means to be Chinese. But like Confucius was a person. He created these ideas and these philosophies that spread over time. And so like just in the same way, we are able to shape thought, shape belief, shape culture. And so how can we use our power and our influence and our collective knowledge and knowing to begin to shape culture and what it means to be Chinese, what it means to be, you know, indigenous or Black or biracial or whatever. Some values that I really connect with in terms of ones that pair well, I guess, with peaceful parenting is just collective well-being, you know, the care, this mutual care for one another. Sometimes peaceful parenting can like lean towards permissiveness or towards like, oh, you just let the child do whatever they want. But I think the value of collective care is really like, we are in this together. So how can all of us feel good in this together and find support for one another and find ways for us all to thrive in this family and in this community? I think even the idea of respect, like respect for elders, respect for those who've gone before us, our ancestors, that's something that I really relate to. The problem is when it comes in an authoritarian way, in a way that's about control and imposition and like where we can't question authority. And I don't think that's true respect anyway. So, but this idea of respect is like, I do want to show honor to those who've gone before me. I do want to learn from them. That doesn't mean I like, you know, just follow them ignorantly without questioning, but yeah, like how to respect each other, this mutual respect. So not only those that have more power than us, but also those that have less power than us. How can I show respect to my children where it just spreads throughout all of our relationships and not just in this one direction way. So
Well, if I can jump in for a sec, like I feel like, oh my gosh, we need to have a whole other talk about like culture, because it's been something that I've been thinking about the idea of culture and how, like you say, we seem to be getting into kind of these culture wars a little bit, and where culture is the concept of culture is now in some ways being weaponized to further oppress people. But when we look at culture, what makes that up, and there is like the roots of that, which I feel like the what we're trying to get to is that collective care, is that community care when we're talking about culture. But then you weave in the stereotypes and the trauma. And, like I have this quote that I keep beside me, is that, blackness isn't the fulfillment of stereotypes. It's about experiencing the world in your black skin, however it manifests. And same kind of thing, like, but oftentimes when we get into like the oppression Olympics, it's like, oh, well, you're not black enough, or you're not indigenous enough, or you're not Chinese enough because you're doing this over here, or you're sounding too educated, or you're being too loving to your kids. Like, and it's just like, we need a whole other talk on this, I think. We need to
yeah.
dive into this more.
Yeah, like I love what you're saying, where it's like culture becomes a way to oppress, culture becomes a way to control,
Mhm,
where it's like, again, these rules and these structures and systems about right ways
mhm,
to behave and perform in order to, like, it becomes performative, right?
mhm,
Right ways to express your culture. Whereas like that quote is beautiful. It's like how can we each embody that in ways that are like authentic to who we are, and where there's space to include all of that. And so yeah, like I think really challenging um, those cultural or ethnic identities as ways to control each other.
mhm,
I think, yeah, we
Mhm.
could have a whole other talk about this.
Totally. I agree that we should have another talk about it because, when speaking around like the collectivism, right? And like
mhm,
thinking about how each other, all of us have the need for belonging. And so when we think about culture and we think about that, when our own culture marginalizes us in some ways or pushes us out,
Mm.
particularly if you are biracial or if you are going against the narrative of what it means to be in that culture, then
mhm,
it is, right? Then you find a marginalization within your own space where you're trying to be belonging to. So it's sort of like, how do we deconstruct that piece for sure? Because that does contribute
mhm,
more to marginalization and oppression and within our own communities, which is like against the whole principle of trying to be collective and to be together. So yeah, for sure. I hope we can have another talk about this soon because I think that's a great idea, Carrie. Yeah, I really want to ask this question because I think it's really important because I
mhm,
know a lot of some of the folks who are listening now or going to be listening to the recording later are on their anti-racism journey. And I think that we need to talk about how peaceful parenting coincides with our anti-oppression
mhm.
learning and also those values. So let me actually read the question. How do you feel anti-racism and peaceful parenting are linked, and why is it important for folks who are learning about anti-oppression or anti-racism to also consider the way that they parent as part of this larger work?
Yeah, so like the way that I sort of described my work in the beginning is like learning how to practice anti-oppression in our homes, which is really what peaceful parenting, conscious parenting is. It's about challenging the ways we use power and control over our children and learning to be in relationship with them that honors them as full human beings. And that is really what anti-racism work is,
Mhm, mhm,
anti-oppression work is the where people populations or people are dehumanized and disrespected, where power is used over them to marginalize them. And I think just recognizing that we do that in our families too. I think it's easy, like when we're doing activist work, to think that like these isms are out there.
Mhm.
They're bad things out there that we are against, and we're the good people. But I think again, we need to recognize that like we are all part of these isms, and it's so important for us in our most intimate relationships to be aware of power dynamics, to be aware of ways that we try to control another person. And sometimes we don't think of children as like people that deserve their own autonomy, that deserve a voice, that deserve their own feelings. Sometimes we think to be good parents, we need to keep them in line and, have quote unquote boundaries with them and all of these things, instead of recognizing that we have power, we have systemic power over children. And how are we going to use that? How are we going to resist using that? How can we be in more partnership with our children and really honor them as full human beings? And so, yeah, I think that is so connected to other anti-oppression work that we do. Is about humanizing those who have been dehumanized, which are children. Children are constantly being dehumanized. It's about sharing power instead of maintaining control. It's about creating more equity. And so I feel like there's a lot of overlap. And when we think of children, they actually live in the intersection of all these isms, right? Where you have children uh, of children who are queer, children who are neurodiverse, children who are Black, or, all of these things. And so they have these compounded intersectional identities. It's not like separate from any of these other anti-oppression things that we are working with. They are the most disenfranchised population that exists within these systems. And so that's always a layer that I bring into what I'm doing. And for those of us who like enter this work through peaceful parenting, also taking those ideas out into the ways that we see the rest of the world, right? So like we can't say that we are conscious, peaceful parents in this realm of our relationship with our children, and then not take those same principles out into the world and how we see the rest of the world. There's just a huge disconnect and a huge lack of integrity and alignment if we do that. If we believe that we need to that people have the right to bodily autonomy, people have the right to self-determination, people have a right to express their anger and their voice and all the range of their emotions, then how are we okay with shutting down expressions of anger and rage? How are we okay with like letting people be occupied? So all of those things, I think there's definitely, is all integrated, it's all connected for me. Oh,
Oh,
you're
you're
still
still
on
on
mute.
mute.
Of course. Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I fully agree because, and I think it's something that some people don't actually think about very often, right? Like we can live these kind of double standards sometimes. And again, even I know within my own home, like even within my own journey, I don't consider myself being perfect at peaceful parenting. Like I'm pretty sure I said things I regret even this morning. You know what I mean? Like it is a constant like process of like doing, and it's same with our activism too, right? It is a constant learning and unlearning and humbling as well of like, oh, maybe I don't exactly know. Maybe I need to make some more space too for this experience that I don't know. I don't understand. I can relate to my own experience as a child through my child, but I'm not living that anymore. You know what? I'm not living that experience anymore. So like giving our children the space to say like, and just be human, really, just to be human beings. Yeah, for sure. It's not always the easiest.
Yeah, and
Um,
part of being, sorry, just
yeah, no,
wanted to jump in and say that part of being human is not getting it right, right? It's like not, it's not being perfect. And so I think who is this? Sonia Renee Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the response to racism, whether you are a person of color or you're white, is radical self-acceptance, like radical self-love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think through this process of like untigering and anti-racism and all this work, it's like we really have to be rooted in radical self-love. And what I mean by that is not um like excusing our behavior or whatever, but it's just being able to hold our shadow parts, our messy parts, our imperfect parts with so much compassion, so much love and empathy, because that is what is going to help us like sustain this practice instead of like spiral into shame and say like, forget it, this is too hard, or not do the work of really digging deeper constantly and humbling ourselves, right? So just, yeah, just wanting to offer that to everybody and for myself too, like, wow, we're not going to get this right. And it's not about getting it right. It's about, I like to think of it as like the direction instead of the destination. We're never going to arrive, right? There's always work to be done. How can we continue to like move in the direction of the values that we want to see in this world? And that's all that we can really, and sometimes it's like, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. That's okay too. That's part of the process. We're still moving. So just so much grace for all of us through this process.
One of the things that I love to share with people doing this work, like I maintain that anti-racism work is healing work, because people step into this sometimes work thinking that they want to be an ally and help racialized people, but then as they start getting into it, it's like, oh, there's a a whole bunch of self-healing that needs to happen too, to be able to do this in this way. But when we look at like white supremacy, and one of the tenets of it, it is perfectionism, right? Without that perfectionism, without creating that standard where some people meet it and others don't, you can't have that hierarchy of power. And so I tell people, lean into imperfection, lean into that messiness. And that's, giving the middle finger to white supremacy, because that's that radical self-acceptance of showing up, knowing that I'm going to make mistakes, knowing that I'm going to learn and grow and change my mind, and all of these kinds of things. So sometimes for those of us who might be a little on the PDA and and you like to push against things, you know, leaning into the imperfect is pushing against white supremacy.
Yes, absolutely. Perfectionism is a tool of supremacy. And I think that it's sometimes helpful for us to recognize that instead of just like, oh, it's like this personal growth thing. But if we recognize it as like something that white supremacy or other types of supremacy are trying to impose upon us, then we can like, yeah,
Yeah.
more easily give it the middle finger, right?
Yeah.
totally. Well, I can see we're like 2 minutes to 11, and I know there's like a lot of comments, so I kind of want to go through them quick here, because I think there might be some questions, and then
We did
we
have
will.
one question that I know for sure. So
Awesome.
I'll read that one as you're going through. But the question came in from Jesseline of, how do we navigate our child's needs versus wants? In the moment, their true needs might be expressed as a want.
I think it's always like validating their want. That doesn't mean like, oh, you want, all this candy, so here you go. But just saying that it's okay for them to want that. I think that in itself is so like where they feel seen and where they know that their desires and that their feelings are held and accepted, instead of saying no, or I mean, sometimes we just have to say no, but maybe there's ways to say no in different ways. Sometimes we say we present the limit by validating it, and that's all that they need to know. We don't actually have to, yeah, you really wanted that. I can see that you did, and maybe we don't have the resources for that right now, but I'm really sad I can't get that for you, or that now's not the time, but I see that you wanted that. And I think that just helps children feel seen and heard and understood. And oftentimes that's enough. And actually always giving into their wants is a reaction, is our fear of, I sometimes feel like that's rooted in fear, where we're afraid of them feeling hard things, like not getting what they want all the time. And so that are trying to soothe their feelings by by always giving into them. Does that make sense? So I think we do have to have discernment, and sometimes we'll get it wrong, and that's okay again. But like, what are their true needs? Like, are they really needing sleep right now? Do they really need some nourishment and food right now? Or is this just a want and I can't, yeah, and it's not really what they actually need.
Well, and along those lines too, if we've been socialized that having, like, being angry or upset or bad emotions, like if we grew up in the household where we weren't allowed to have those, and the idea is that everybody needs to be happy all of the time, right? Like you say, then that's going to, not meeting that want might trigger that fear in us of like, oh, our child is going to be upset. They're going to have this reaction. I need to be the one that placates this and makes them happy, as opposed to just validating, right? Yes, this is hard. This really sucks. I hear you.
Yeah.
Mhm. How I wish we could all apply that to ourselves more.
Right?
Just like hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, that feels nice, right? Like, I wish I could hear that. It just say that to myself is a good reminder too, right? Like while we're doing this work, that we think so much again, and I know we kind of talked about this earlier, where we're doing this with our kids, and we think peaceful parenting, or we're doing this all for our children, but there is so much healing that's happening when we choose to walk this way, just for ourselves, just even just giving ourselves the permission. When have we ever had that permission to just like, oh yeah, I really want to do this thing, I can't do it, and it really sucks. And sometimes I have to, just sit in that acknowledgement and give myself the gentleness and kindness. So yeah. Thank you all so much for being here today. By the way, we're at 11:03. I don't know if we are ready to close up, or if there's any other questions that are remaining that anybody would like to ask. I guess I'll just open it up for that. I know I saw Jesslyn's hand a few minutes ago, but I'm not sure if you had your question answered. No, okay. Yeah, it's been such a wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Iris, for coming to chat with us. It's just been lovely. This has been a really healing conversation for me personally, and I've just really enjoyed my time this morning. So thank you all so much. And Carrie, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you so much, Iris. And there's been lots of comments in the chat just about gems that you've said, and, moments of aha and healing. So really appreciate having this conversation, and hopefully we can do it again another time. I would love
Yeah,
that.
no, I love that. I'd love to chat more with all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their weekend. And if you are somewhere warm and sunny, that you get to enjoy the warm sun. And if not, that you just enjoy your day and time. Awesome. I'm just seeing everybody saying goodbye. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And happy Mother's Day as well
Oh,
to those who
yeah.
celebrate. Yeah. Happy Mother's Day.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks again, Iris, for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.